Gather close as we descend into one of the most unsettling chronicles ever recorded in the shadowed history of Savannah, Georgia. But first, before we proceed, I bid you to mark your presence in the comments below. Tell us from what corner of the world you have joined us, and at what precise hour you lend an ear to this grim narration. We are intrigued to learn which locales and under what cloak of day or shroud of night these haunting accounts find their audience. The year was 1841 when the first whispers of strange occurrences began to stir at the Foresight Estate. A mere 3 miles east of Savannah's storied heart, the plantation itself stood as a vainglorious monument to Southern prosperity, its alabaster columns ascending like silent sentinels against the oppressive Georgian sky. Yet, beneath this grand facade, and concealed behind the meticulously manicured gardens, a profound darkness had taken root, a malevolence that would lie dormant and undiscovered for many agonizing years. Elellanena Bowmont was brought to the Foresight Estate in the bleak winter of 1835. Her life acquired through a cold transaction that was etched into the county ledger with little more than a dispassionate line of cursive and a price. According to the parish records of the time, she was but 22 years of age. The formal documentation described her as possessing a host of exceptional domestic skills, though whispers from those who knew would later contend these qualities were merely a pretense for her acquisition. Thomas Harrington, a man of 46 years and lord of Foresight Estate, had recently been widowed, his wife claimed by the wasting sickness. Accounts from the period suggest he had been observed surveying the newly arrived souls at the market for several weeks, his gaze lingering before his selection fell upon Elellanena. The property's caretaker journal, unearthed during renovations in 1958, holds a most curious entry dated the 12th of January, 1835. A new soul arrived today. It reads, "The master seems unusually solicitous of her quarters, having requested the chamber adjacent to the kitchen be readied with a particular and meticulous care." A strange request for the dead of January. In those initial days, Elellanenna's presence at Foresight Estate seemed, to the casual observer, entirely unremarkable. She went about her duties alongside the roughly 30 other bound souls who toiled upon the cotton plantation and within the grand manor house. Yet, what set her circumstances apart, according to the faded ink of household records and the chilling clarity of later testimonies, was her swift and unsettling elevation to a position within the main house itself, specifically an assignment of direct and personal service to Thomas Harrington. By the autumn of 1836, Elellanenna's status had altered in a most significant manner. The estate's own expense ledgers, now preserved in the hallowed archives of the Savannah Historical Society, reveal a series of peculiar purchases, bolts of fabric of a quality far exceeding the typical allotment for the enslaved, a new pair of leather shoes, and most remarkably, a small, delicate silver locket. The very receipt for this final, telling item was discovered pressed between the pages of Thomas Harrington's personal Bible, a relic found locked away in a dusty trunk in the estate's forgotten attic in 1962. A woman named Maria Wilson, who served as a cook at the neighboring Wilkes plantation, would later provide a chilling testimony to her grandson, a testimony that was thankfully recorded as part of a 1948 oral history project. According to her haunting account, everyone who served in the great houses knew of the darkness unfolding at Foresight. The master, she recalled, had taken a grim fancy to the Bowmont woman. She was not treated as the others were. She took her meals within the house, was adorned in finer clothes, but there was a shadow in her eyes, something that was not right. It was as if she was a ghost in her own body. Then, in the spring of 1837, Elellanena Bowmont became visibly with child. No formal announcement was ever made, of course, but the estate records show she was quietly relieved of her more strenuous duties. The plantation physician, a Dr. Samuel Thorne, became a more frequent, almost spectral, presence at the estate. A logbook, unearthed from his possessions after his passing in 1872, holds cryptic notations concerning the delicate constitution of things at Foresight, and prescriptions for draughts and tonics intended to soothe the so-called female fragility. Then, on the 18th of November, 1837, Elellanena brought a daughter into the world. Yet, the infant's existence was ghost-like, never recorded in the cold calculus of the official property ledger of Foresight Estate, a chilling omission that modern researchers would mark as the first tear in the fabric of normalcy surrounding the Bowmont children. In its place, a faint whisper of a record survives, scratched into the private journal of Thomas Harrington himself. Providence has blessed the house with new life today. I have named her Caroline. For my mother, she has her eyes. For the span of several months that followed, a fragile illusion of peace settled over Foresight Estate. Elellanena and her infant daughter were cloistered in the room adjoining the kitchen, a space curiously enlarged for their presence. Within these walls, as per the household inventory ledgers, were kept items rarely afforded to those in bondage. A rocking chair, a copper bathing tub, and a small wooden cradle, draped in fine linens. And then the first shadow fell. In the suffocating heat of July, 1838, the infant Caroline was seized by a fever. Dr. Thorne was summoned, but his remedies were but whispers against a storm. The child breathed her last on the 23rd of July, a mere 8 months old. No death certificate was ever filed, with the local authorities a common enough oversight for those held in servitude. Yet, what followed was anything but common, for Caroline was not committed to the forgotten earth of the unmarked plot beyond the North Field, where the other souls bound to the estate were laid to rest. Instead, Thomas Harrington himself commanded that a small grave be carved from the soil beneath a solitary oak at the garden's eastern fringe. Of Elellanen's response to this loss, no official parchment speaks, but a chilling account survives, penned by one Mary Stilwell, the wife of a merchant who frequented the shadowed halls of Foresight. In a letter to her sister in Charleston, she wrote, "I chanced upon the most unsettling tableau today at Foresight. The young woman of color, the one who serves within the house, was kneeling before a small, fresh wound in the garden's earth, utterly motionless, a silent, sculpted figure of grief. Mr. Harrington watched her from the veranda, yet made no motion to disturb her vigil. When at last she rose, her face was a mask, utterly barren of any discernible emotion. I have never beheld such profound sorrow so tightly contained, and the sight of it chilled me to the very marrow of my bones. By the winter of 1838, a new life stirred within Elellanena. Once more, this time, the pregnancy passed without incident, and on the 3rd of May, 1839, she delivered a son. Thomas Harrington bestowed upon him the name James, after his own father. The estate's ledgers from this era betray increased expenses for that secluded room by the kitchen, a larger bed, more linens, and most ominously, a new lock installed upon the door. The infant, James, seemed to flourish at first. Household accounts speak of the babe's robust appetite and powerful lungs, For nearly 10 months, a fragile peace held, and there were no portents of the darkness to come. Then, in the bleak month of March, 1840, the cruel hand of fate struck once more. James was overcome by an affliction of the lungs, a malady that swiftly tightened its grip. Despite the ministrations of Dr. Thorne, the child's life was extinguished on the 15th of March, and once again, Thomas Harrington decreed a burial beneath that same solemn oak in the garden, a small plot beside his sister Caroline's. No stone marked the spot, but the estate's gardener would later note that Elellanena herself planted white roses upon the soil. The events that unfolded in the shadow of James's passing would curdle into a dark legend, a matter of fevered speculation for future historians and local chroniclers of the town's grim secrets. The estate's ledgers, cold and factual, record that a mere 3 days after the burial, Thomas Harrington departed for a business trip to Atlanta, and during his 2-week absence, a shadow fell upon the house, an event so shrouded in secrecy it was never committed to paper. Upon his return, a haunted Thomas wrote in his private journal, returned to find matters at home in disarray. Ligged, confined to her quarters. Mrs. Potter reports an extreme melancholy and a refusal of all food. Dr. Thorne was consulted and has prescribed laudanum for the nerves. The situation requires careful management. Mrs. Potter, the housekeeper and silent witness, left no personal account of this dark period. However, the mundane laundry records betray an unusual increase in linens from Eleanor's secluded quarters, while the kitchen ledger reveals that meals were delivered to her, a stark departure from her custom of collecting them herself. By the summer of 1840, a fragile Eleanor had seemingly recovered sufficiently to resume some of her duties within the oppressive walls of the house. Then, in September, a chilling revelation. She was once again with child. This third pregnancy coincided with a disturbing and noticeable change in Thomas Harrington's demeanor. According to the accounts of business associates who visited the estate, one Frederick Montreux, a cotton broker from Savannah, noted in his commercial diary, Harrington seems possessed by an unusual agitation, twice interrupting our meeting to check on matters within the house. He inquired about physicians in Charleston, men who might be more skilled than our local practitioners. His obsessive concern for domestic matters is interfering with his judgment in business affairs. As Eleanor's pregnancy advanced, Thomas Harrington made arrangements that deviated sharply from the established norms of the plantation. He converted a small balugan, cloistered sitting room adjacent to his own bedroom, into a birthing chamber, and hired a midwife from Savannah, a Mrs. Sarah Blackwood, to take up residence at the estate for the final, foreboding month of the pregnancy. Mrs. Blackwood's presence was dutifully documented in the estate's payroll records, yet she left no personal account of her time at Foresight. Her silence as profound as the house's shadows. The only reference to her observations comes from a whispered conversation recounted years later by her daughter to a church archivist. Mother would never speak directly of her time at Foresight Estate, she recalled, except to say once that she had never seen a woman so silent in her suffering, nor a man so desperate in his hope. On April 10th, 1841, Eleanor gave birth to her third child, another girl, Thomas, in a rare display of paternal claim, named her Elizabeth, and just as with the previous births, Thomas Harrington immediately summoned Reverend William Stokes from St. John's Episcopal Church in Savannah to the estate to perform a strangely private baptism. This highly unusual event was recorded in the church register with a chilling omission. No mother's name was listed, only Elizabeth Harrington. daughter of Thomas Harrington, baptized at Foresight Estate, April 11th, 1841. For the very first time, Thomas Harrington's journals suddenly overflowed with daily observations of one of Eleanor's children, of Elizabeth's first smile, the color of her eyes, which he noted changed from blue to brown, just like her mother's, and her apparent recognition of his very voice. He even commissioned a portrait of the infant from a Savannah artist, a canvas which was unearthed from the dusty attic storage of Foresight Estate in 1959. The canvas itself partially ravaged by the creeping damp. Then, in the suffocating heat of August, 1841, the infant Elizabeth began to show signs of a grave illness. Dr. Thorne was summoned immediately, but this time, in a fit of panic, Thomas Harrington also called for a physician from Charleston, a Dr. Marcus Whitfield, a man renowned for his expertise in the maladies of children. Yet, the combined efforts of these two physicians proved utterly futile. Little Elizabeth succumbed on August 17th, at the tender age of just 4 months. The cold, meticulous estate records reveal that Thomas Harrington expended an extraordinary sum upon a small marble headstone, the very first formal marker for any of the lost children. This stone, unearthed centuries later, broken and ravaged by time during an archaeological survey in 1965, bore only the solitary name Elizabeth, etched alongside the dates of her brief life and early demise. But what transpired in the shadowed days following Elizabeth's passing would become a tale shrouded in conflicting accounts and fevered speculation for more than a century. The only established facts, drawn from the dispassionate ink of estate records, are these: on August 20th, a mere 3 days after Elizabeth was laid to rest, Thomas Harrington departed for Savannah on matters of business. He returned, however, with startling abruptness that very same evening. The following morning, August 21st, Elellanena Bowmont was nowhere to be found upon the estate. A search was hastily organized. The surrounding woods and shadowed roads were scoured. Word was sent to neighboring plantations. Eleanor had simply vanished. Thomas Harrington, in a move that historians have long deemed significant, did not contact the authorities. Instead, he offered a substantial reward to his overseer, contingent upon Elellanina's discreet return. After 3 long days, the desperate search finally yielded a grim discovery. Elellanena was located in the derelict hunting cabin that stood sentinel on the furthest, forgotten edge of the Foresight property, nearly 4 miles from the grand house. According to the overseer's terse report, logged in the estate's annals, he located the woman, physically unharmed but clearly unsound of mind, and returned her to the house under close watch. What followed was a dark period of approximately 2 months, during which Elellanena was, according to the hushed tones of household accounts, confined for the sake of her health. The chamber she had once occupied was emptied of her presence, and she was relocated to a desolate room on the 3rd floor of the main house. The estate records chillingly detail the purchase of a special lock for this door and the boarding up of its single window from the outside. Dr. Thorne paid his visits twice weekly throughout this grim interval. His medical log contains only the most skeletal information. Patient at Foresight continues under heavy sedation, refuses sustenance when lucid, speaks of the children, calling to her from beneath the great oak, recommended continued isolation and laudanum as required. Then, on October 12th, 1841, Thomas Harrington's private journal bears a single, cryptic entry: "It is finished. May God have mercy on us all." The very next day, the mundane housekeeping records note that the 3rd floor room was emptied and thoroughly cleansed. No further mention of Elellanena Bowmont ever appears in any estate document. She had, in essence, vanished from the written record. What truly became of Elellanena Bowmont has since been the subject of intense and morbid speculation among historians and local chroniclers. The most commonly accepted theory, pieced together from fragmentary evidence, suggests she perished either by her own hand or from the cruel effects of her treatment, and was interred in an unmarked grave somewhere upon the sprawling estate grounds. However, no mortal remains that could be definitively identified as hers were ever unearthed in the many subsequent excavations. Thomas Harrington never remarried. His own behavior, in the haunted years following 1841, grew increasingly erratic and withdrawn. His business associates noted a steep decline in his interest in the plantation's operations. He began to spend extended, solitary periods in Savannah, and later Charleston, leaving the shadowed Foresight Estate under the sole management of his cousin, Walter Harrington. The estate's productivity fell into a steady decline. By 1847, Thomas Harrington's own financial. The ledgers of the estate whispered a grim tale of mounting debts. In 1850, he sold approximately half of the souls bound to the estate. By 1855, the spectre of ruin-haunted Foresight Estate, which was now operating at a considerable loss. Thomas Harrington met his end in 1858 at the age of 69. As per the final dictates of his will, the shadowed lands of Foresight passed to his cousin Walter's son, James Harrington. The will, however, contained a most peculiar stipulation. The great oak in the eastern garden was never to feel the bite of an axe, and the ground surrounding it was to remain forever undisturbed. But James Harrington possessed little sentiment for the decaying grandeur of the plantation. In the wake of the Civil War and emancipation, the estate crumbled into utter dereliction. In 1872, the blighted property was sold to a lumber company. In defiance of the dead man's wishes, the ancient oak was felled, and the hallowed garden area was violently cleared for the march of progress. According to hushed newspaper accounts, the workmen who tore the tree from the earth made a disturbing discovery. For tangled beneath its gnarled roots, they found 4 small sets of remains. Not the 3 the lonely grave markers would have suggested. The additional set belonged to an infant, a soul barely newborn in size, laid to rest in the cold earth with no coffin to shield it. This macabre discovery might have faded into local legend had it not coincided with the passing of Dr. Samuel Thorne, who had once been the physician at the ill-fated Foresight Estate. Among his private effects was a sealed envelope, ominously marked Foresight Estate, confidential. Inside lay a single, brittle page, a chilling account dated the 11th of October, 1841. Called to Foresight under the most dreadful of circumstances. T.H. reports E.B. delivered of a stillborn male child in the dead of night. No midwife was present to bear witness. The poor babe was already shrouded, prepared for the earth. When I arrived, the mother I found in a grievously weakened state, her body and spirit both ravaged. The evidence of a great loss of blood was undeniable. I advised her immediate removal to the hospital in Savannah, but T.H. refused, insisting upon treatment within those cursed walls. Against my better judgment, I have acquiesced to his demands. I fear the outcome has already been written by a cruel fate. I commit this account to paper to unburden my conscience, though I pray to God it never sees the light of day. The unearthing of this document, along with the 4th tiny skeleton, ignited a brief, fevered sensation in the local press. However, with the principal actors in this tragedy long since returned to dust and the estate itself being consumed by the maw of industry. Interest soon flickered and died. For nearly a century, the ghost story of Elellanena Bowmont and the lost children of Foresight Estate faded into the mists of forgotten lore. Then, in 1963, a graduate student named Margaret Wilson from the University of Georgia began to delve into the unexplained vanishings of enslaved women from the shadows of antebellum Savannah for her doctoral dissertation. Her research led her, fatefully, to the scattered, fragmented records of the Foresight Estate, remnants preserved like relics in disparate archives. Wilson's painstaking work began to piece together the haunting narrative from these dispersed sources: cold estate ledgers, solemn church records, forgotten business correspondence, and grim medical logs, private journals, and the fading whispers of oral histories. Her dissertation, completed in 1967 but left unpublished, concluded with a theory that would, in time, seize the imagination of historians. According to Wilson's chilling analysis, Elellanena Bowmont did not perish at Foresight Estate in that bleak October of 1841. Instead, in the aftermath of the tragic stillbirth and the secret burial of her fourth child, she was spirited away through clandestine channels, sold to a plantation owner deep in the Louisiana wilderness, unearthed a bill of sale, dated the 13th of October, 1841, for a domestic servant, aged 28 and of delicate health, sold by one Thomas Harrington to a Jeremiah Wilcox of St. Francisville, Louisiana. From this brittle document, Wilson endeavored to trace the shadowed path of Elellanenna's life following this grim transaction, but the Louisiana records had been consumed by the courthouse fires that raged during the Civil War, leaving only ashes and silence. Her trail of inquiry grew cold, and her dissertation was consigned to the dusty oblivion of university archives, its revelations largely unseen. In 1968, as machinery tore into the earth of what was once the Foresight Estate to build a manufacturing facility, the workers excavating for a foundation struck something metallic. They had uncovered a small silver locket, buried some 6 feet deep, near the ghost of where the great oak had once stood. Within its tarnished clasp lay a braid of dark hair and a miniature portrait, painted upon ivory, of a woman whose features hinted at a heritage of two worlds. Upon the reverse of the portrait, almost faded to nothing, were the initials E.B. That locket now rests within the quiet halls of the Savannah Historical Society Museum, a small, easily dismissed artifact that remains one of the few tangible echoes of Elellanena Bowmont to have survived the ravages of time. The very ground where Foresight Estate once stood has been utterly reshaped, first by the cold hand of industry, then by commerce. Nothing now remains of the grand plantation house, the silent gardens, or the sentinel oak that once marked the children's graves. The sole physical reminder is a small, stark historical marker, erected in 1992 at the edge of what is now a sprawling shopping center parking lot. The plaque makes no mention of Elellanena Bowmont, nor of the lost children. It states simply, site of Foresight Estate, circa 1830 to 1870, cotton plantation owned by the Harrington family. And yet, local whispers tell a different story, of strange occurrences that have long been reported in that blighted area. Particularly in the eastern section, where the garden once bloomed, security guards, keeping their lonely vigil through the night, have spoken of hearing a woman's soft, sorrowful song. Though its source can never be found, maintenance crews, arriving with the dawn, have reported finding small arrangements of white roses, laid upon the cold ground in the pre-dawn gloom. Though the unblinking eyes of security cameras have never captured the hand that leaves them, but perhaps most disturbing are the accounts from 3 separate night watchmen, their tenures spanning from 1975 to 2005, who all claim to have witnessed a woman in antiquated dress gliding slowly through the property near the witching hour of 3 o'clock in the morning, always in mid-August, always drifting toward the eastern corner where the great oak once stood, and always vanishing like mist when approached. These chilling accounts have been dismissed as mere urban legends, the sort of folklore that inevitably clings to places stained by a troubled past. And yet, they persist. A ghostly narrative passed down through generations of Savannah residents, a whispered counterpoint to the sanitized history peddled in tourist brochures and on guided tours. In 1969, Margaret Wilson resolved to return to her haunting research on Elellanena Bowmont, intending to expand her dissertation into a full manuscript. However, she soon reported an increasing and unsettling difficulty in accessing certain archives and private collections. In a letter to her academic advisor, she confessed, "I am encountering an unexpected and formidable resistance from several families connected to the old Harrington lineage. Doors that were once open to me have now been firmly barred. I cannot escape the chilling sensation that even after more than a century, there are those who would prefer this dark history remain buried forever." Wilson ultimately abandoned the project, reportedly after receiving anonymous, ominous communications, urging her to direct her scholarly pursuits elsewhere. She retreated, accepting a quiet teaching post at a small New England college, and her damning findings were forever consigned to silence. Thus, the true fate of Elellanena Bowmont, after October of 1841, remains shrouded in conjecture. If she was, as Wilson's research grimly suggested, sold down the river to Louisiana, no clear chronicle of her life or her death in that distant land has ever been unearthed. She fades from the pages of history as utterly as she was erased from the ledgers of Foresight Estate. What we can cling to as cold, hard fact is this: between the years of 1837 and 1841, a young enslaved woman named Elellanena Bowmont brought 4 children into the world upon the cursed grounds of Foresight Estate. All 4 were stolen by death in infancy or their tenderest years. Her research led her, fatefully, to the scattered, fragmented records of the Foresight Estate, remnants preserved like relics in disparate archives. Wilson's painstaking work began to piece together the haunting narrative from these dispersed sources: cold estate ledgers, solemn church records, forgotten business correspondence, and grim medical logs, private journals, and the fading whispers of oral histories, the rest her innermost thoughts, her private anguish, her unimaginable suffering. Her desperate flight, or more likely demise, all this is lost to the shadows of history. Lurking in the voids, between documented facts, in the profound and deliberate silences of the official record, we may approach these specters of the past, trace their chilling outlines, but we can never truly banish them from the gloom. In the wake of the Civil War and emancipation, the estate crumbled into utter dereliction. In 1872, the blighted property was sold to a lumber company. In defiance of the dead man's wishes, the ancient oak was felled and the hallowed garden area was violently cleared for the march of progress. According to hushed newspaper accounts, the workmen who tore the tree from the earth made a disturbing discovery. Then, in 2008, a descendant of the Harrington line bequeathed a collection of forgotten family papers to the Savannah Historical Society, and hidden among them was a water-stained journal its pages warped by time. Kept by Thomas Harrington's own cousin, Walter, the man who assumed control of Foresight Estate in the 1840s, while most entries dutifully chronicled plantation business. 1. Dated April of 1842, a mere 6 months after Elellanena Bowmont had vanished into thin air, contained this chilling passage. Thomas unburdened his soul to me today, his tongue loosened by several brandies. I curse that he did, for some knowledge, once shared, becomes a permanent stain upon the soul. He believes the children were seized by a divine retribution, a penance for his own sins. Perhaps that grim fantasy is easier for his mind to bear than the alternative his physician dared to suggest, that they might have been guided toward their untimely end. When I pressed him, asking by whose hand, he looked at me with such a terrifying hollowness in his eyes and uttered, "By the one who loved them too much to let them live as she was forced to live." I shall not transcribe the remainder of his confession. Some words are so monstrous they should never be preserved, even on the most private of pages. This journal entry, unearthed over 160 years after the ink had dried, adds yet another horrifying layer to the enigma of Elellanena Bowmont and the lost children of Foresight Estate. It exhumes questions that can never be truly answered, questions of agency, of resistance, and of the unholy choices confronting a soul trapped within a monstrously inhuman system. The small graves beneath the oak are long gone now, their sacred remains likely scattered to the winds during excavations for some modern commercial venture. The room that held Elellanenna's life, first by the kitchens and later in the desolate confines of the 3rd floor, has been utterly erased. The locket, bearing her initials, rests cold within a museum display case, glanced at by passers-by who remain blissfully ignorant of the weight of its history. And yet, something of her story endures. It refuses to be silenced, to be completely erased. It echoes still in the dry text of academic papers, in the hushed tales of local ghost tours, and in the unsettling, the profound hush that descends when the darker annals of history are laid bare. And perhaps, if local lore is to be heeded, a restless spirit still roams the grounds of the former Foresight Estate on sweltering August nights, forever seeking what was stolen or what was cruelly left behind. For those of us who unearth this history now, separated by a chasm of nearly 2 centuries from the tragedy itself, there remains a sacred duty to acknowledge what transpired, not merely the documented facts, but the shadowed human reality they conceal, to see Elellanena Bowmont not as a footnote in dusty plantation ledgers, but as a woman of flesh and blood who lived, sufferde, perhaps loved, and perhaps resisted in the only ways her chains allowed, and who, in life or death, was ultimately erased from the written record, yet not from memory's ghostly grasp. In the stark absence of justice, remembrance must become its own solemn verdict. And so we remember Elellanena Bowmont and the 4 children laid to rest beneath an oak that no longer stands, on land that bears no resemblance to its former self, in a world transformed, and yet, in some dark ways, remains chillingly unchanged. The echo of their story still resounds for those who dare to listen. In the spring of 1969, at the very moment Margaret Wilson was abandoning her obsessive research into Elellanena Bowmont, another discovery surfaced, destined to add yet another layer of shadow to this deeply troubling history. Amidst renovations at St. John's Episcopal Church in Savannah, workmen stumbled upon a hidden compartment, sealed away behind the vestry wall. Within lay a small wooden box, a reliquary of sorts, containing several items, a folded, yellowed parchment, a small cloth pouch holding what seemed to be dried herbs, and a carved wooden effigy of a woman clutching a child. The paper, when painstakingly unfolded by archivists, revealed itself to be a letter, penned in an educated yet desperate hand. It was dated October the 14th, 1841, and addressed simply to Father William. Its contents bled onto the page. I write in great haste, and with the direst distress of conscience. The thing in which I have participated weighs as a stone upon my very soul. The woman from Foresight Estate was delivered here last night. More ghost than living flesh. By Mr. Hell. He professed she had sought to do violence to herself following the loss of her infant, and required a sanctuary and care far beyond what his own household could provide. The truth, however, as unveiled by Dr. Thorne, who arrived soon after, was a thing of far greater darkness. The woman, he said, had been kept under lock and key since the child was born into silence. When the sedatives were withdrawn, she became, in his words, unmanageable in her grief. He confided that Mr. H. feared she might reveal certain damning truths concerning the children who had perished at Foresight, truths that would prove utterly ruinous to his standing in the community. Its contents bled onto the page. I write in great haste, and with the direst distress of conscience. The thing in which I have participated weighs as a stone upon my very soul. The woman from Foresight Estate was delivered here last night. More ghost than living flesh. By Mr. Hell. He professed she had sought to do violence to herself following the loss of her infant, and required a sanctuary and care far beyond what his own household could provide. She fixed me with a gaze that seemed to pierce the veil of this world and whispered, "All four sleep beneath the oak." I sang to them as they passed from this life. It was the only kindness I was permitted to offer. When I asked if she wished to confess some sin before her journey, assuming she spoke of some dark act against the children, she offered a smile, so ghastly it chilled my very blood. The sin was not mine. "Father," she said, "the sin was bringing them into this world. Knowing what awaited them. I merely unlatched the gate to a place of peace. I cannot know if I was an accomplice to concealing a monstrous crime, or an agent of mercy for a soul shattered by unimaginable torment. Perhaps both are true. Within a cruel design meant to obliterate all personal will, what slivers of choice could possibly survive? What desperate forms might resistance assume? How can one weigh the soul's love against its suffering when both are chained within an inhuman system in the year 2012? The spectral eyes of ground-penetrating radar scanned the desecrated lands of the former Foresight Estate, now entombed beneath a shopping center. She fixed me with a gaze that seemed to pierce the veil of this world and whispered, "All four sleep beneath the oak." I sang to them as they passed from this life. It was the only kindness I was permitted to offer. When I asked if she wished to confess some sin before her journey, assuming she spoke of some dark act against the children, she offered a smile, so ghastly it chilled my very blood. The sin was not mine. "Father," she said, "it lay dormant until 2003. When historian Eliza Montgomery unearthed it while researching the clergy's tangled response to slavery in antebellum Savannah. Her subsequent groundbreaking paper, Complicity and Conscience, the Church and Foresight Estate, published in the Southern Historical Review, cast a new, unsettling light upon the ghost of Elellanena Bowmont's story. Montgomery's research, however, had also dredged up a faded shipping manifest from October the 15th, 1841, listing one female Negro, infirm, among the cargo of the merchant vessel Carolina Star, its prow set for New Orleans. The ship's log, a relic preserved in the maritime archives. Notes with chilling brevity that this nameless passenger perished at sea on October the 17th and was committed to the deep, as was the custom of the waves. If this soul, lost to the abyss, was indeed Elellanena Bowmont, as Montgomery's research grimly suggests, then her mortal journey concluded, not on land, but in the cold waters of the Atlantic, far from the haunted grounds of Foresight Estate and the Louisiana plantation that was to be her final prison. The small wooden carving, that silent witness found with Sullivan's letter, remains locked away in the archives of St. John's Church. It portrays a lone, standing woman clutching 4 small bundles to her breast. Their features are blurred, indistinct, but their tragic significance is unmistakable. The carving style has been identified by anthropologists as a whisper of West African traditions, suggesting that even in bondage, Elellanena clung to the cultural threads of her past. The herb pouch, when its secrets were finally unsealed by botanists in 2005, was found to hold a dark trinity dried foxglove, Yimsonviet, and moonseed berries, all plants with lethal potential when prepared by a knowledgeable hand. All, according to botanical surveys of the era, grew wild upon the very grounds of Foresight Estate. These damning discoveries guided Montgomery and those who followed toward a chilling new theory, one that shattered the long-held narrative of Elellanena as merely a tragic victim of Thomas Harrington's cruelties. Instead, they posited a far more complex and heartbreaking understanding that Elellanena, staring into the unbearable future of her children's enslavement, possibly made the most devastating choice a mother can conceive: to end their suffering herself. These chilling accounts have been dismissed as mere urban legends, the sort of folklore that inevitably clings to places stained by a troubled past. And yet, they persist, a ghostly narrative passed down through generations of Savannah residents, a whispered counterpoint to the sanitized history peddled in tourist brochures and on guided tours. Within a cruel design meant to obliterate all personal will, what slivers of choice could possibly survive? What desperate forms might resistance assume? How can one weigh the soul's love against its suffering when both are chained within an inhuman system in the year 2012? The spectral eyes of ground-penetrating radar scanned the desecrated lands of the former Foresight Estate, now entombed beneath a shopping center. The lingering question of agency: who held the power, who shaped the tale, who controlled the final word, haunts the very heart of this dark history. Within a cruel design meant to obliterate all personal will, what slivers of choice could possibly survive? What desperate forms might resistance assume? How can one weigh the soul's love against its suffering when both are chained within an inhuman system in the year 2012? The spectral eyes of ground-penetrating radar scanned the desecrated lands of the former Foresight Estate, now entombed beneath a shopping center. The technology's cold gaze uncovered a hidden secret, a small, subterranean chamber buried some 15 feet beneath the modern earth, precisely where the ancient oak had once cast its long shadow. When unearthed under the watchful supervision of archaeologists from the University of Georgia, this forgotten vault yielded a wooden chest, its timbers ravaged by time, yet stubbornly intact. Within its decaying embrace lay several relics: a child's hand-knitted cap, 4 small cloth effigies of varying sizes, positioned in a silent procession, a painstakingly copied page from a book of prayers, and most chillingly, a journal shrouded in faded, time-worn cloth. The journal's fragile pages had mostly surrendered to the damp and the decades, but a few haunting passages clung to legibility. This theory remains a dark whisper, controversial and unproven. Some historians maintain the children's passing could be attributed to the cruel whims of nature, as the spectre of infant mortality loomed large in that unforgiving era. Yet others suggest that if a mortal hand was indeed at play, the culpability might have rested with Thomas Harrington himself, who may have seen the children of two worlds as a creeping threat to his carefully constructed social standing. One such entry, marked July 25th, 1838, a mere 2 days after the passing of her firstborn child, reads, "They have laid Caroline to rest beneath the oak. Master T calls it a special favor to be set apart from the others beyond the north field. He cannot comprehend that the earth claims us all equally, with or without his hollow favor. I keep vigil by her small, earthen mound when my duties permit. Others perceive only the tormented scrawlings of a grieving soul, seeking solace in her faith." With the doorways she mentioned being a metaphor for a spiritual passage, not a physical one. Another entry, dated March 18th, 1840, penned shortly after the loss of her second child, states simply, "James has gone to join his sister. The white doctor claims his lungs were fragile, but he dares not speak the reason why. The creeping damp of our quarters, the relentless labor I endured, with him bound to my back until my 7th month. The thin milk my exhausted body could offer. These are the true afflictions, but they are not etched in any medical tome. The lingering question of agency, who held the power, who shaped the tale, who controlled the final word, haunts the very heart of this dark history. Master T sheds tears for him, calling it the will of God. I do not weep anymore. I am learning that tears are a privilege, reserved for those who believe this world holds a measure of fairness. I hold no such illusions now. My thoughts drift instead to my grandmother's tales, of children who return to the spirit world when this one proves too cruel for their souls to endure. Perhaps they are far wiser than we who are left behind. A hatred for the oak has taken root in me. For the crushing weight it will press upon her tiny form as its roots delve deeper. And yet, I find my hand drawn to its bark, feeling its life pulse onward as hers has been extinguished. Is this the fate of mothers in this wretched place, to become women who whisper secrets to trees, for their children sleep eternally below? This last cryptic entry, penned a mere 2 days before Elellanena was said to have delivered a son born in silence and then vanished like a phantom from the Foresight Estate, remains a source of haunting and intense scholarly conjecture. Some see within its lines the chilling confession of a mother who hastened her children's journey to the grave as a final, desperate act of mercy. Others perceive only the tormented scrawlings of a grieving soul, seeking solace in her faith. With the doorways she mentioned being a metaphor for a spiritual passage, not a physical one, what is undeniable is that Elellanena Bowmont, a woman who was little more than a spectre in official records, a name tied to a monetary sum in cold transaction ledgers, found a way to etch her own truth into history, to preserve the echoes of her thoughts, and perhaps to wield the only power left to her within a system engineered to erase her very soul. This last cryptic entry, penned a mere 2 days before Elellanena was said to have delivered a son born in silence and then vanished like a phantom from the Foresight Estate, remains a source of haunting and intense scholarly conjecture. Some see within its lines the chilling confession of a mother who hastened her children's journey to the grave as a final, desperate act of mercy. The artifacts discovered are now held in the shadowed archives of the Savannah Historical Museum's special collections. Though they are not displayed for the common eye, researchers must petition for special access to gaze upon them, a policy that has drawn ire from those who believe Elellanena Bowmont's story, however agonizing, deserves to be brought into the light as a vital, haunting chapter of America's past. A hatred for the oak has taken root in me, for the crushing weight it will press upon her tiny form as its roots delve deeper. And yet, I find my hand drawn to its bark, feeling its life pulse onward as hers has been extinguished. Is this the fate of mothers in this wretched place, to become women who whisper secrets to trees, for their children sleep eternally below? The Foundation also bestows an annual scholarship for inquiries into the veiled histories of enslaved women and their children, with a somber focus on the shadowy forms of resistance and survival that conventional historical accounts have so often ignored or misread. We cannot rewrite the chilling annals of the past. Harrington Wells declared at the consecration of the new marker, "What is undeniable is that Elellanena Bowmont, a woman who was little more than a spectre in official records, a name tied to a monetary sum in cold transaction ledgers, found a way to etch her own truth into history, to preserve the echoes of her thoughts, and perhaps to wield the only power left to her within a system engineered to erase her very soul. What is undeniable is that Elellanena Bowmont, a woman who was little more than a spectre in official records, a name tied to a monetary sum in cold transaction ledgers, found a way to etch her own truth into history, to preserve the echoes of her thoughts, and perhaps to wield the only power left to her within a system engineered to erase her very soul." This last cryptic entry, penned a mere 2 days before Elellanena was said to have delivered a son born in silence and then vanished like a phantom from the Foresight Estate, remains a source of haunting and intense scholarly conjecture. Some see within its lines the chilling confession of a mother who hastened her children's journey to the grave as a final, desperate act of mercy. What is undeniable is that Elellanena Bowmont, a woman who was little more than a spectre in official records, a name tied to a monetary sum in cold transaction ledgers, found a way to etch her own truth into history, to preserve the echoes of her thoughts, and perhaps to wield the only power left to her within a system engineered to erase her very soul. Yet, perhaps some histories imprint themselves upon a place transcending the physical realm to echo across the chasm of time, not as phantoms of the supernatural, but as profound emotional resonances that those with a sensitive spirit perceive in their own haunting way. What remains undeniable is the chilling truth that the chronicle of Elellanena Bowmont and her 4 children continues to haunt all who dare to learn of it. Within the dusty archives, the unearthed chest, the letter secreted behind a church wall, the silver locket, and in the whispered histories passed from one generation to the next, we uncover the fractured pieces of a life that officialdom sought to reduce to a mere transaction of property. These shards of memory do not form a complete portrait. Far too much has been devoured by time. Too much was never etched into the records at all. At its heart stands a bronze effigy of a woman, her face lifted to the heavens, her arms empty, yet raised ever so slightly, as if releasing a silent prayer to the unforgiving sky. The sculptor, Amara Johnson, described her stands not merely as a monument to suffering, but as a testament to impossible choices and an unbreakable spirit. But they offer fleeting glimpses of a woman who breathed, who suffered, who perhaps loved, and who perhaps resisted, a woman who, even in the most soul-crushing of circumstances, harbored an inner world so profound that its echoes still resonate nearly 2 centuries hence. For the modern sojourner who wanders through the memorial garden, or the scholar who handles these preserved relics, the saga of the Foresight Estate serves as a somber reminder that history is no mere collection of facts and dates. It is a vast, intricate tapestry woven from human experience, much of which was deliberately shrouded in shadow or silenced at the very moment it transpired. To reclaim these experiences demands more than mere archival diligence. It requires an imaginative empathy, a courage to peer beyond the official ledgers into the lives that flickered in the margins. The final days of Elellanena Bowmont remain veiled in a profound uncertainty. If she did indeed perish at sea aboard the Carolina Star, her body given to the cold Atlantic depths, then she possesses no grave that can ever be visited, no stone that bears her name. The memorial garden stands in the place of such a marker, an acknowledgement of a haunting absence as much as a remembered presence. Perhaps this is a fitting tribute for a woman whose life was defined by a systematic erasure of her autonomy, her familial bonds, her very soul in the cold eyes of the law. Within the dusty archives, the unearthed chest, the letter secreted behind a church wall, the silver locket, and in the whispered histories passed from one generation to the next, we uncover the fractured pieces of a life that officialdom sought to reduce to a mere transaction of property. These shards of memory do not form a complete portrait. Far too much has been devoured by time. Too much was never etched into the records at all. This last cryptic entry, penned a mere 2 days before Elellanena was said to have delivered a son born in silence and then vanished like a phantom from the Foresight Estate, remains a source of haunting and intense scholarly conjecture. Some see within its lines the chilling confession of a mother who hastened her children's journey to the grave as a final, desperate act of mercy. Legions of other enslaved women lived, brought forth children into bondage, bore unimaginable los, and vanished, leaving scarcely a whisper in the annals of history. Within the dusty archives, the unearthed chest, the letter secreted behind a church wall, the silver locket, and in the whispered histories passed from one generation to the next, we uncover the fractured pieces of a life that officialdom sought to reduce to a mere transaction of property. These shards of memory do not form a complete portrait. Far too much has been devoured by time. Too much was never etched into the records at all. As visitors now depart the memorial garden, they pass a stark plaque, inscribed with a lament from Elellenanena's journal, one of the few passages to have survived the ravages of time. They profess we have no souls to save, yet they fear our spirits after death. They say we are not fully human, yet they recoil from our humanity when it reveals itself. Remember this, if nothing else, what they stole from us in life, we reclaim in memory, and memory, once awakened, is a force that cannot be re-enslaved. Whether Elellanena truly penned these exact words, or whether they are a distillation of a collective agony attributed to her singular voice, is perhaps less crucial than the profound truth they exhale. Within a system engineered to dehumanize and to erase, the very persistence of memory, individual and collective, becomes in itself a defiant, haunting act. Yet, perhaps some histories imprint themselves upon a place transcending the physical realm to echo across the chasm of time, not as phantoms of the supernatural, but as profound emotional resonances that those with a sensitive spirit perceive in their own haunting way. What remains undeniable is the chilling truth that the chronicle of Elellanena Bowmont and her 4 children continues to haunt all who dare to learn of it. In this way, Elellanena Bowmont, a woman intended to leave no mark on history beyond her price in a transaction ledger, continues to speak across the centuries, reminding us that behind every cold entry in those books was a full human life, with thoughts, feelings, desperate strategies for survival, and possibly, in the end, choices made on her own terms. However limited and tragic those terms might have been, the sound of her story still reverberates, a phantom tolling for those willing to listen. And in that echo, something of Elellanena Bowmont lives on.